Good morning and welcome to Chat with Rohan episode 3 in conversation with Dr. Bibek Debroy, Chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council and one of my idols. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here today with you, sir.
Good morning, always a pleasure to talk to you.
We're sitting today in this beautiful lawn in Lutyens, Delhi. But what a lot of people may not know about your journey is that at a very young age, you were familiar with pain and suffering. Your family saw the partition and you did not have what one would call the easiest childhood years.
I grew up in Shillong. I spent the first 10 years of my life in Shillong, which was then the capital of undivided Assam. And the reason I was born in Shillong was because my family was uprooted in the course of the partition. And my ancestral home is today in what is now Bangladesh. So in 1948, several months after the actual partition, my grandfather sort of walked across, and that's how I grew up in Shillong. Difficult childhood, obviously it was much more traumatic for my grandfather. It was much more traumatic for my father. Certain things one would look at as being difficult. At that particular point in time, I did not perceive them as hardships. Examples of that: we did not have tap water. Water used to come from a well. We do not have toilets in the current sense. It used to be what is called one of those pit latrines. We did not have electricity. Everything had to be done with the light of a lantern. I used to walk to school, which is a distance of about 7 kilometers. In hindsight, many people would define them as deprivation. At that time, I did not feel particularly deprived. It was just part of life. My life changed at the age of 10. It changed at the age of 10 because of two reasons. My father got a promotion, so he was promoted to the Indian Audit and Account Service. Our lives changed because of that. And the second thing that happened is that I got a Government of India scholarship. So the Government of India scholarship changed my life. Do I believe education can change lives? Yes, I do, because I can see that happening in my life, and my life would not have been what it is today had I not had the access to education. So in that sense, yes, I do believe that the social sectors, education and health, are particularly sectors where there's need for government intervention.
From an early age, you've been educated on government-funded scholarships and you went on to study in the best universities in the world. Have you always had a passion for effecting societal change through economics?
Economics was an accidental choice because I always wanted to study science. I was keen to study physics. Economics was more of my father's choice because it's a subject he wanted to study, but because the migration affected his studies, he could never study economics. So it was really his suggestion. When in college I decided to study economics, I had no idea what economics is. It's a different matter that subsequently have come to like economics, but at that point, in fairness, it was not my conscious choice.
What is your vision for a new India that universal access to education and good healthcare for all will create?
One needs to have an India that is a prosperous India, that is a more developed India, and one can see the signs of that happening. Question, of course, is how do we define that development, how do we define that progress, and what is the timeline for that? So one possible way of defining it, the traditional way that economists always do that, is what percentage rate of growth, and that rate of growth always translates into a per capita income, which measures in some sense cross-country how rich a country relatively is or how poor a country relatively is. So one can say, all right, a per capita income of $4,500 US by whatever be the timeline, let's say 2047. One can say that income growth, these are not ends in themselves, they are means. So we also need to look at what kind of human development we achieve in the process. We want to move to a high human development category as per the UNDP's Human Development Index, the HDI, which also means that the levels of poverty, I am not getting into issues of how you define poverty and what the poverty line is, that the levels of poverty will drop to something like less than 5%, which will mean Indian society will be completely transformed. In the process of doing this, we need to have more efficient labor markets, we need to have more efficient land markets, we need to have more efficient capital markets, and we need to have productivity.
What many people may not know about you is that in addition to being a prolific author, authored no less than 100 books, you are also a voracious reader. Does it come from a place of respecting the opinions of others, ideologies, and being inclusive in your outlook towards growth and development? You write in your book, Making of a New India, and you have always been a champion of participatory democracy at the last mile in India. What is the role that Jan Shakti and Jan Bhagidari are playing in the making of a new India?
There are certain things we expect government to do. And when we say government, there are three layers of government. People think of government and people immediately think of union government, and within that people immediately think of the executive arm of union government. But in government as defined by the constitution, there are three different organs of state. There is the executive, there is the legislature, and there is the judiciary. Similarly, there are three layers of government. There is union government, there is state government, and there is local government. Local government has led to a tremendous sense of empowerment, at least in a social sense. Perhaps more so for panchayats, less so for urban local bodies, but there has been a tremendous sense of empowerment. The 75th Independence Day speech from Red Fort, the Prime Minister used the expression Sabka Prayas. And the constitution also begins, the preamble also begins with the expression we the people. So India will not become a better governed country only because of what government does. It will become a better governed country because of what we as citizens do, the Sabka Prayas part of it. If I look at something like Swachh Bharat Abhijan, the reason Swachh Bharat Abhijan, especially in rural areas, is so powerful today is because of the participation of individuals, and therefore indeed it is in the interests of individuals to make India a better economy and a better society.
What is your vision for an India that has growth, which is job generative, equitable, spatially dispersed? These are all causes you strongly believe in.
Yes, I do. Look, we've already talked about growth, we've talked about productivity, we've talked about the layers of government, but India is a very, very heterogeneous country, spatially. We get a sense of that when we look at the states, and SKOCH Foundation has been in the business of ranking states on different parameters, but states are administrative boundaries. Deprivation and development do not necessarily respect administrative boundaries. So in purely relative terms, there are parts of India that are still disadvantaged and deprived. And since May 2014, a lot has been done by the present government, and I am using the two terms as synonymous, the two terms of the government as synonymous, to provide basic necessities, whether it is financial inclusion, whether it is physical infrastructure, whether it is toilets, clean tap water, all of that. We must realize that if I use purchasing power parity and to convert per capita income, a place like Chandigarh has a PPP per capita income that is like that in Europe. But there are parts of India that have PPP per capita incomes that are in the category of what are known as LDCs. So the vision that all of us should have for India is an integration of these parts of India into the trajectory of growth and development.
How would you like to see the rural-urban divide being addressed in the years to come?
I don't think there is a rural-urban divide. Rural-urban is a census definition. In parts of India which have developed fast, and if I travel by road there, I don't know where rural ends and where urban begins. Yes, there is a census definition, yes, there is a different definition between the panchayat and the urban local body, but purely in terms of development, I don't know. There are villages in India which have population sizes of 50,000, and those villages are more developed by any parameter than some towns and cities. In Delhi, there are 237 villages. So there is one stretch of road that I am familiar with in Delhi that goes all the way from the Qutub Minar on one side to the National Highway on the other side. It's a main road in Vasant Kuj. One side of that is rural, the other side is urban. So therefore, yes, historically the rural-urban divide has been one kind of lens used to examine development, but I don't think we should overuse it because it's sort of breaking down increasingly.
What is your vision for a globally competitive India? With the world moving towards digital technologies, how do you see the dream of $1 trillion digital economy coming to life?
Competition has many different sources. It depends on levels of development. At some point in the future beyond 2035, India is also going to become old. This so-called demographic dividend is not going to last forever. At different levels of development, as they move up the ladder, different countries tap different sectors for their competitive advantage. All said and done, as of today, we are still a relatively more labor abundant economy, which logically means that the price of labor in relative terms will be cheaper than the price of capital and technology. So I am not talking about niches, forget the niches, but otherwise in the next 15 odd years, the primary source of competitiveness for India, regardless of the state, will be in terms of its ability to make efficient usage of the resource that we have in plenty, which is labor. As we move up the ladder, and of course land, as we move up the ladder, then the focus shifts to technology and competitiveness.
There are many facets to the dynamic personality that you have. Perhaps what people don't know is that you have an equal passion for culture, literature and scientific temper. Your work in translating Indian mythological epics from Sanskrit, do you believe there is a disconnect between our culture and the nation's youth today?
I am particularly interested in a certain corpus of Sanskrit texts which is called Itihasa and Purana. Itihasa is a term that's typically used for the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and there are the Puranas. There was a generation, maybe 3 generations ago, that was familiar with Sanskrit. Well, if not speak Sanskrit, it could understand Sanskrit, it could read Sanskrit. That generation is dying out. There is a generation today, forget Sanskrit, that generation sometimes cannot speak a coherent sentence in the mother tongue. This is a generation which is much more familiar with the use of English. So these texts need to be available in English. When I say I am doing translations, people raise their eyebrows and say, wait a minute, why are you translating? Haven't they been translated? The answer is no. What you see are dumbed down versions, reduced to Itihas and Purana for dummies. The Mahabharata translation that I did in 10 volumes runs into 2.5 million words. I am now in the process, I did the Mahabharata, I did the Valmiki Ramayana, there are other things I did in between. Now I am doing the Puranas, I am on the 6th Purana translation. Together this corpus will amount to 12 to 14 million words. This is a corpus that the younger generation is not aware of. Point, however, is that because the younger generation is much more familiar with English, it needs to be communicated in English. And the Sanskrit Pandits weren't doing it. To me, it's a completely negative criticism to criticize the Western scholars for their translations and say, you haven't got it right unless you are doing your own. Now, because the Sanskrit scholars were not doing it, I thought since I know Sanskrit, well, let me try and do it.
Not only does the Prime Minister of India rely on you for your advice, the nation's youth look up to you as an idol. If I may ask you this, from the perspective of a young Indian, what would be your advice to the Honorable Prime Minister of India for the nation's youth?
Wait. Is it my advice to the Prime Minister? My advice to the Prime Minister will be for the ears of the Prime Minister. It will not be for the public. The Prime Minister's advice, the Prime Minister has been articulating in several speeches in a very generic sense, that you have a vested interest in the future of this country. People like you, people in your age group. Because notwithstanding increases in life expectancy, we talked about 2047, which is when India celebrates 100 years of independence. In 2047, notwithstanding increases in life expectancy, I will be dead. People who belong to my generation will be dead. You will be there, and you will leave this country in trust to the future generation. So therefore, my suggestion to the young, at some point you should be interested in your own individual sphere of making India a better country. Well, the second part I would be very reluctant to recommend to anyone that I be looked upon as a role model, because my life has been a series of accidents and a series of taking risks at various points in my career, when I have left the secure and the safe and have jumped into the hazardous and the uncertain. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster. However, it is a fact of life that for years and years I wandered around with a resignation letter in my pocket and produced it at the drop of a hat when necessary, and therefore I took all kinds of risks, what were perceived to be as risks.
Like you said, you used to carry your resignation letter in your pocket. How did you deal with detractors, differing opinions, and those who might have been at the other end of the spectrum?
My personal decisions have always been my own, so I never consulted others, nor have I cared for the opinions of others in my personal decisions. There were friends who have at several times said, "Are you mad? Why are you resigning a permanent job where you will be employed till the age of 60 or whatever it was, you will get provident fund, you will get gratuity, you will get this, that and the other, crazy." But as I said, I have never paid any credence to those. There is a different kind of response when one comes to actual public policy making as opposed to private decisions, personal decisions. When it comes to public policy making, you naturally need to consider differing points of view, because sometimes the criticism has a valid point to make.
Would you think that a healthy respect for differing opinions and ones that may perhaps be contrarian to your own comes from a deep-rooted sense of respect for culture?
We used to have these 6 Shadadarshana, which in English is translated as the 6 schools of philosophy. And we have descriptions of debates taking place, particularly in texts connected with Nyaya, you would have these descriptions. And there are actual descriptions of debates where a debate continues over several days. So we've had a debate today. So tomorrow when the debate continues, I say, "Rohan, I'm very sorry." Actually recorded. "Rohan, I'm very sorry. In the debate yesterday, I raised my voice. And you tell me, you should not be sorry. I am sorry that I made you raise your voice yesterday." Now, this is a healthy tradition of debating that has existed as part of our culture. Unfortunately, we have lost all of this. I personally think we have lost all of this is because A, of our exposure to the West, and B, our forgetting our own traditions of debating.
On a parting note, you've always championed causes of good education and healthcare for all. Job generative growth is a policy imperative for India. What do you see as the incremental policy changes that would help India achieve this dream?
Incremental policy changes by who? And this also comes back to the question of what do we expect government to do. The social sectors are by and large the province of the states. Health is entirely a state subject. Education, a large part of it is actually a state subject. So what I'd like to see is a greater efficiency, not an increase, because there's already a tremendous amount of money that's going in, a greater degree of efficiency in that public expenditure. These are the things that any economist will think of when he or she talks about reforms. But I would like to see greater attention to the legal system and its inability to deliver efficiently, a greater attention to the legislative system, because these after all are part of the framework on which all of our policies rest. These are based on the Constitution.
Thank you very much for taking the time to spend this morning with us on Chat with Rohan. It's been an honor and a privilege to speak to you this morning, as I'm sure it has for several other young Indians. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Rohan.